During World War II, there was a plant so powerful that 1 acre could produce more nitrogen than 10 tons of chemical fertilizer. Families growing it never bought fertilizer again, not for 1 season, not for 5 years, never, because this plant didn't just fertilize soil once, it fertilized forever. A farmer in Wales named Thomas Edwards planted this in his vegetable garden in March 1942. By autumn, his soil nitrogen levels had doubled. By the next spring, they'd tripled. He grew tomatoes, beans, and cabbage for 3 consecutive years without adding anything. The plant manufactured fertilizer while he slept. Same plot, same crops, 0 inputs, triple the nitrogen. By 1944, over 70% of British victory gardens were using this plant. Gardens that had been depleted and lifeless exploded with productivity. Soil that hadn't grown food in years suddenly produced abundantly, and families stopped depending on fertilizer that couldn't be purchased at any price. Then the war ended. Within a decade, the plant disappeared from every agricultural guide in America. Extension offices stopped teaching it, seed catalogs quietly removed it, and chemical companies made absolutely certain you never learned it existed. Why? Because you cannot sell fertilizer to people who grow their own nitrogen. You cannot create dependency when one planting provides fertility forever. You cannot profit from recurring sales when the solution reproduces itself every year without purchase. In 1947, a $200 billion fertilizer industry was born from factories that had made explosives, and they needed you to forget what your grandparents knew. They needed you buying bags every season instead of planting once and harvesting nitrogen perpetually. But the documentation survived. Thomas Edwards kept records. Agricultural surveys measured the results. And the proof sits in archives, technically public but practically invisible. Until now. In this video, we're uncovering the World War II forever plant that ended fertilizer dependency, the exact species, the precise method, why it was systematically erased from history, and how to grow unlimited nitrogen starting with 1 handful of seeds. If you're new here, we expose forgotten knowledge that billion-dollar industries have spent decades burying. The methods that made families independent when systems collapsed. The plants that work forever, not just until you run out of chemicals to buy. Subscribe now because this information threatens every company profiting from your dependency. Share this video because they definitely don't want it spreading. Now let me show you what they erased and why. Number 1, the white clover revolution. In the spring of 1942, Thomas Edwards stood in his garden outside Cardiff, Wales, staring at depleted soil. Years of continuous planting had stripped it bare. His last harvest had been pathetic, and wartime rationing meant fertilizer was impossible to obtain. His grandfather had told him stories about a plant that fed the soil instead of depleting it, a plant that created nitrogen from thin air, a plant farmers had used for thousands of years before chemical agriculture made them forget. He found seeds in an old shed, white clover, trifolium repens, tiny seeds barely visible. He scattered them between his vegetable rows in March and forgot about them. Within 3 weeks, green carpet covered the ground, low-growing, spreading rapidly, not competing with his vegetables but filling every empty space between them. By June, he noticed something remarkable. His vegetables were darker green than they'd ever been. Growth was vigorous despite the depleted soil. The tomato plants that usually yellowed by mid-season stayed deep green through August. He didn't understand what was happening underground. But scientists documenting victory gardens did. The clover roots were covered in small white nodules, tiny bumps that contained bacteria called rhizobium. These bacteria were performing biological alchemy. They were capturing nitrogen gas from the air, 78% of the atmosphere, and converting it into ammonia compounds that plants could absorb. Free fertilizer, manufactured continuously from thin air. The measurements were staggering. 1 square yard of white clover growing for 1 season fixed approximately 200 to 300 pounds of nitrogen per acre equivalent. Thomas's garden needed maybe 150 pounds of nitrogen annually. The clover was producing double what his vegetables required. But here's where it became revolutionary. When clover plants died or were cut down, all that accumulated nitrogen released into the soil. Available immediately, feeding every plant nearby. Thomas harvested his vegetables in autumn. His tomato yield had increased by 42% compared to the previous year. His beans, which were also nitrogen fixers, somehow produced 31% more. Even his cabbage, a heavy nitrogen feeder, exceeded all previous harvests. He'd grown more food in depleted soil with 0 fertilizer than he had ever grown in rich soil with purchased inputs. The clover had done it all. Number 2, the permanent nitrogen factory. Thomas Edwards didn't replant clover the next spring. He didn't need to. Because white clover is perennial. It comes back every year, forever. In April 1943, the clover emerged from winter dormancy without any replanting. Thicker than the previous year, spreading faster, producing more nitrogen. This permanence was what made chemical companies panic. 1 planting, lifetime fertility, no recurring purchases, no annual sales, no dependency whatsoever. The clover grew aggressively through spring and summer. Every time Thomas cut it back to keep paths clear, the roots remained alive underground. Those roots continued housing the nitrogen-fixing bacteria, continued manufacturing fertilizer 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for free. Year 2 nitrogen production exceeded year 1 by approximately 30%. Why? Because the bacterial populations had multiplied. More bacteria meant more nitrogen fixation. The system was improving, not depleting. By year 3, Thomas's soil nitrogen levels measured at 78 parts per million. Before clover, they'd measured at 19 parts per million. The clover had increased soil nitrogen by over 400% in 3 years. His vegetable harvests reflected this. Year 3 tomato production reached 173 pounds from space that had produced 89 pounds in year 1 before clover. 94% increase from a plant he'd planted once and never fertilized, but the benefits extended beyond nitrogen. The clover roots created channels in the soil as they grew and died. These channels improved drainage and aeration. Earthworm populations exploded because they fed on dead clover roots. More earthworms meant more soil mixing and more nutrient availability. The clover canopy suppressed weeds by covering bare soil. Thomas spent 70% less time weeding than before. Water requirements dropped by approximately 40% because the clover mulch layer retained moisture. One plant. Multiple benefits. Zero cost. Permanent installation. Agricultural surveys documented this pattern across thousands of victory gardens. Gardens that incorporated white clover showed sustained productivity increases year over year. Gardens without clover showed declining productivity despite whatever fertilizer could be obtained. The data was undeniable. White clover eliminated fertilizer dependency completely, and that elimination threatened an industry that was about to be born. Number 3, the post-war explosion that never happened. The war ended in May 1945. Victory gardens had proven that families could feed themselves, that biological fertility outperformed chemical inputs, that white clover eliminated the need for purchased fertilizer entirely. Logic suggested that clover planting would explode in peacetime, that every home garden would incorporate it, that agricultural colleges would teach it as standard practice. The opposite happened. In 1946, the first post-war gardening guides were published. They made no mention of white clover. Victory garden techniques that had sustained millions through war were simply omitted from peacetime advice. Agricultural extension offices received new directives. Teaching materials that had promoted clover during wartime were pulled from circulation. Agents who continued recommending biological fertility methods found their positions terminated or their responsibilities reassigned. University agricultural departments shifted focus dramatically. Research grants became available for studying chemical fertilizers. Funding for biological nitrogen fixation research dried up. Professors teaching clover management saw their courses eliminated from curriculum. The coordination was suspicious across multiple institutions, across different states, across various agricultural organizations. The same plant that had been promoted as essential during wartime became unmentionable in peace. Why? Because in 1947, the first major fertilizer production facilities converted from explosives, manufacturing, to synthetic nitrogen production. The same Haber-Bosch process that made bombs made fertilizer. The factories existed. The infrastructure was built. The chemical companies desperately needed markets. But they faced a problem. Millions of Americans had just spent 4 years proving they didn't need synthetic fertilizers. Victory gardens had demonstrated that biological methods worked better. White clover had shown that nitrogen could be grown instead of bought. The companies needed people to forget. Fast. Seed catalogs cooperated immediately. White clover, which had been prominently featured during wartime, disappeared from listings by 1948. The seeds became difficult to obtain. Home gardeners who wanted to continue growing it couldn't find suppliers. Gardening magazines shifted tone. Articles began appearing about the importance of scientific fertilization, modern methods, measured applications, professional approaches. The implication was clear. Biological methods were primitive. Chemical methods were advanced. By 1952, white clover had been successfully erased from home gardening practice. Not banned, not prohibited, just made invisible through coordinated omission. Number 4, the science they buried. The suppression wasn't based on clover failing. It was based on clover succeeding too well, and the science proving that success was buried alongside the practice. During the war, agricultural researchers had conducted extensive studies on nitrogen fixation rates. They'd measured clover performance under various conditions. They'd documented yields. They'd compared biological versus chemical fertility. The data was comprehensive and conclusive. White clover fixed between 150 to 300 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year, depending on conditions. Commercial fertilizer applications rarely exceeded 150 pounds per acre because more caused pollution and crop damage. But clover nitrogen was different from chemical nitrogen. Chemical fertilizer dumps nitrogen all at once. Much of it washes away before plants can use it. What remains is taken up quickly, often too quickly, causing rapid wheat growth. Clover nitrogen releases gradually as roots die and decompose. The timing matches plant growth cycles naturally. Seedlings get small amounts. Rapidly growing plants get more. Mature plants get sustained levels. The synchronization is perfect because it evolved over millions of years. Chemical nitrogen also destroys soil biology. The salts in synthetic fertilizers kill beneficial bacteria and fungi. Soil that receives chemical nitrogen becomes dependent on continued applications because the biological systems that naturally provide nitrogen have been eliminated. Clover nitrogen does the opposite. It feeds soil biology. The bacteria in root nodules produce compounds that benefit other soil organisms. Fungal networks spread more extensively. Earthworm populations increase. The entire soil ecosystem becomes healthier and more functional. Studies conducted between 1942 and 1945 documented this. Soil treated with chemical fertilizers showed declining organic matter content and decreasing biological activity over time. Soil with white clover showed increasing organic matter and exploding biological populations. One long-term study tracked 2 adjacent plots for 4 years. Both started with identical depleted soil. One received maximum recommended chemical fertilization every year. One was planted with white clover and received no fertilizer. Year 1, the fertilized plot outproduced the clover plot by 23%. Year 2, the difference narrowed to 8%. Year 3, the clover plot outproduced the fertilized plot by 11%. Year 4, the clover plot exceeded the fertilized plot by 41%. The clover plot was improving annually. The fertilized plot was slowly declining despite continued fertilization. The trajectory was clear. Long-term fertility came from biology, not chemicals. These studies were published during wartime in agricultural journals. After the war, they became difficult to find. Not retracted, not disputed, just quietly removed from citations and excluded from subsequent research reviews. The science hadn't changed. The profitable narrative had. Number 5, the modern rediscovery. In the 1990s, organic farmers started questioning why they needed to purchase fertilizer. They'd been told biological methods couldn't match chemical productivity. But their fields told different stories. Some remembered stories from grandparents about clover, about how farms stayed fertile before chemicals existed. They started experimenting. The results matched World War II data exactly. White clover eliminated fertilizer needs completely. Soil health improved continuously. Yields increased over time instead of declining. Word spread through organic farming networks. More farmers planted clover. Extension offices, still promoting chemical methods, provided no support. But farmers didn't need support. The plant handled everything itself. Today, regenerative agriculture practitioners use white clover as foundation species. They plant it everywhere, between crop rows, in orchards, around vegetables, as pasture undergrowth. Anywhere soil exists, clover improves it. The science is now rediscovered and reconfirmed. White clover fixes nitrogen as effectively as World War II researchers documented. The bacterial symbiosis works identically. The soil improvements happen predictably. But here's what most people still don't know. White clover grows wild across most temperate regions. That low-growing plant with white flowers covering lawns and invading gardens, that's likely white clover. Free nitrogen, growing everywhere. And lawn care companies are paid to kill it. The irony is complete. People spray herbicides to eliminate a plant that would fertilize their lawns naturally. Then they purchase nitrogen fertilizer to green up grass that would be greener without chemicals. White clover in lawns reduces fertilizer needs by 80 to 90%. The clover stays green during drought when grass turns brown. It never needs mowing more than once per month, and it provides food for pollinators. But lawn care companies can't profit from self-fertilizing lawns. So clover is labeled a weed, something to eliminate, something undesirable. The same suppression that erased clover from victory gardens now eliminates it from lawns. Different decade, same motivation, protect chemical sales. Number 6, growing your forever plant today. Thomas Edwards' original method was simple. Nothing has changed. The plant works identically today. White clover seeds are available from agricultural suppliers and some organic seed companies. Purchase untreated seeds. Avoid any coated with fungicides. 1 pound covers approximately 4,000 square feet when broadcast thinly. For vegetable gardens, scatter seeds between rows in early spring, about 1 ounce per 100 square feet. The seeds are tiny. Mix them with sand for even distribution. Broadcast across the soil surface. Don't bury them. They need light to germinate. Water gently. Keep soil moist for 10 to 14 days. Germination occurs when soil temperature exceeds 50 degrees Fahrenheit. The clover will emerge as tiny seedlings that grow quickly into spreading ground cover. The first year, let the clover establish. Don't cut it back aggressively. Allow it to flower and set seed. This ensures a thick stand for following years. By year 2, the clover will be fully established. It will emerge from winter dormancy in early spring. Growth will be rapid and vigorous. This is when nitrogen fixation reaches peak levels. Plant vegetables directly among the clover. The low-growing clover won't compete with taller crop plants. It will suppress weeds and retain moisture while manufacturing nitrogen continuously. If clover grows too thick around plant stems, trim it back. The cuttings can be left as mulch or added to compost. The roots remain alive and continue fixing nitrogen. The clover will reseed itself annually. After 3 to 5 years, you'll have permanent living mulch that fertilizes perpetually without any replanting. For lawns, overseed existing grass with clover in early spring or early fall. Use approximately 1/4 pound of seed per 1,000 square feet. The clover will fill in gradually. Within 2 seasons, you'll have mixed grass clover lawn that stays green without fertilizer. Stop fertilizing. The clover provides all nitrogen the grass needs. Stop watering as frequently. The clover stays green during drought. Stop spraying herbicides. You're trying to grow one of the plants herbicides kill. The lawn will be greener, healthier, and requires 70% less maintenance than pure grass. And you'll never buy fertilizer again. This is what they erased. This is why they erased it. Because self-fertilizing lawns and gardens eliminate recurring chemical purchases. And chemical purchases generate billions in annual revenue. They didn't survive by buying fertilizer. They didn't depend on chemical companies. And they didn't accept the lie that soil fertility required purchasing from corporations every season. What they had was white clover, one plant that manufactured nitrogen from thin air, a plant that turned depleted soil into abundant earth, a plant that fertilized forever from one planting. Thomas Edwards grew vegetables for 34 years after the war ended. He never bought fertilizer once. The clover he planted in 1942 continued producing nitrogen until he sold his home in 1976. 34 years of fertility from one handful of seeds. His neighbor, who'd followed modern advice and purchased fertilizer annually, spent thousands over those same decades. Both had productive gardens. One paid nothing, one paid constantly. The difference was knowledge. Knowledge that chemical companies needed erased to protect their markets. For 70 years, they've been winning. They buried the research. They removed clover from seed catalogs. They convinced people that nitrogen comes in bags and fertility requires purchases. They created dependency where independence had existed. The World War II generation proved that families could be self-sufficient, that biological methods outperformed chemicals, that one plant eliminated the need for an entire industry. And that proof had to be erased to create the markets chemical companies needed, but the plant survived. Because white clover doesn't care about corporate profit models. It grows in lawns despite herbicides. It colonizes gardens despite being unlabeled and unsold. It fixes nitrogen despite nobody purchasing it. Nature provided a fertility system so perfect, so permanent, so free that human systems had to erase it from memory to maintain profit streams. The next time you see white clover in your lawn, remember, that's not a weed, that's free fertilizer. That's nitrogen manufactured from air. That's independence growing in your yard. And lawn care companies want you paying them to kill it, so you'll buy what it provides naturally. If you believe this knowledge is worth preserving, if you want independence instead of dependency, subscribe now. Hit that notification bell, because we're uncovering everything they buried. Every plant, every method, every solution that threatens corporate profits. Share this video with everyone you know. Send it to a friend. Post it everywhere. Because every person who plants white clover is one more person who stops buying fertilizer. Every garden using it is one more victory. Every lawn growing it is one more crack in the wall they've built around biological fertility. This is how we take our power back. Not through protests, not through politics. Through action. Through knowledge. Through the simple act of planting one species that fertilizes forever. One handful of seeds, one season of establishment, and you'll never buy nitrogen again. The fertilizer companies spent 70 years erasing this plant from agricultural practice. We're going to spend the next 70 years making sure everyone knows. Because Thomas Edwards wasn't lucky. He wasn't special. He just remembered what corporations needed forgotten. That soil builds itself when you let biology work. That nitrogen falls from the sky for free when the right plants capture it. That fertility doesn't require factories, trucks, bags, or purchases. It requires one plant, one permanent installation, one decision to stop paying for what nature provides freely. I'll see you in the next video where we uncover another World War II secret they erased from history. Another method that works forever. Another plant that makes you free. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, share this everywhere. Because the clover is growing, the truth is spreading, and no amount of erasure can stop either one forever. The forever plant is waiting, the knowledge is here, and your garden is calling, one planting, lifetime fertility. Never buy fertilizer again. That's why they erased it. That's why you need to plant it. And that's why we'll never stop spreading this truth until every garden grows its own nitrogen and every family remembers what freedom from dependency actually means. The white clover is the forever plant. The knowledge is the forever tool. And your independence is the forever threat to systems built on your dependence. Plant it, share it, remember it. because they spent 70 years making you forget. We're spending forever making sure you remember.